And not only that, there was one of the stabs that severed her cord or something, correct? There was one that was pretty deep.
It past this layer called the dura, which is kind of it's a membrane that holds fluids and stuff like that in. It protects the nervous system and so forth at the bottom of the brainstem. That was discovered to have been punctured, and any expert that I've talked to that has seen that has gone, the amount of pain that would have caused, she wouldn't have been able to continue. And we have to assume that if she committed suicide, we have to assume she continued because the knife was in her chest. So, and then later on, another pathologist who looked at it, who worked for Philadelphia, said that she didn't see any vital reaction, which means there wasn't a pulse in her body. There wasn't blood pressure that would cause it to bleed. And one of the reasons that she said one of the reasons that could be is because her heart may have already stopped by then.
Right.
So,
right. So, all right, here, I have a bunch of questions about this. Now, what did her family and friends and even Sam say was her frame of mind? I mean, she's a first grade teacher. Was she unstable? I mean, was she upset? Was she suicidal? Do people have, knowledge of her wanting to commit suicide?
So, Ellen was not depressed. She was seeing a therapist at the time, and the therapist said she was anxious. She was experiencing anxiety. So there was no depression. Ellen, in the weeks previous to her death, had reached out to a couple people. She had reached out to some of her friends, and she just said that work was just very stressful right now. And she just wanted to get away from work. She called her parents and said, "I'd like to move home. And work is just so stressful. I want to just give it up and I want to move home." And her parents were kind of like, "Well, you've got something good going here. Let's get you a therapist. If you got issues, let's get a therapist. Let's help you work your way through this." And she had just started seeing the therapist.
I mean, that's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not diminishing the stress level of being a toddler's, a teacher for toddlers, basically. But I mean, how stressful could that be that you want to give up your job and move home? I'm curious if you really delved into it, if there was more that she was anxious about, and it maybe was manifesting as she was anxious about work, but could have been in her relationship or in her just mentally in general.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. Ellen's body. Well, in the autopsy report, it says there are 11 bruises on Ellen's body. That is bullcrap. There are not 11 bruises on Ellen's body. There are dozens of bruises on Ellen's body. They're everywhere, including her neck. There's hemorrhaging in her neck. Some of these bruises were old. They were like a week old, 10 days old. So, I think the evidence points to Ellen being in a very abusive relationship. And I, as a layperson, just kind of working my way through this, not being, a psychologist or a psychiatrist here, I think it seems reasonable that somebody who is going through this kind of abuse would by somebody that they love, right? They're engaged to, they're living with. Maybe she just wasn't able to
verbalize that
in her head. Yeah. And so maybe she believed it was work.
Right.
It was, but in my opinion, she was in a very abusive relationship, a very abusive environment, and she was looking for a way out. She was saying that work was very difficult. Not only did she talk to her parents about leaving, she talked to her cousin about leaving. Hey, can I move in with you? She had a cousin who lived in Philadelphia, and the cousin asked, "Well, are you coming to live with me, or are you and Sam coming to live with me?" And at that point, Ellen stopped talking about it.
So it's really interesting you bring that up because, there's this movie that just came out that's gotten a lot of hype recently called, I think It Ends With Us, the Blake Lively domestic violence movie. Have you seen it yet?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
Well, I did. And, it was interesting because it really does show how you get sucked in, and she was engaged to this guy and he starts to abuse her, but she was making excuses. And even as a viewer watching, you're like, well, did that happen? And was it an accident? And she would justify it and make excuses because she didn't really know if it was abused, because no one wants to believe that that can happen to them.
Sure.
And also, as a woman who has been engaged, before a couple of times, you know what that's like when you feel like that's final. Like, how am I going to get out of this? Right? Like, because now everybody assumes that you're going to have to you're going to get married, and to think about how you cancel the wedding, how you tell people that this is no longer a relationship.
That social pressure has to be immense, right?
Immense, right? So again, we're talking about probable things. Now,
and by the way, Sam was on paper, Sam was a catch, man. He came from a well-to-do Philadelphia family that was generationally wealthy. His parents were well thought of. His extended family had political power in the area. Josh and Sandy wanted nothing more than for their daughter to fall in love with a nice Jewish boy and have that traditional, Jewish wedding and the whole thing. Right. So there was so much pressure. I can imagine that she just didn't know how to deal with that.
Right. Me too. I can imagine that. Now, maybe there is a probable thing that it wasn't him and it was someone else abusing her at work. I don't know, because she's verbalizing that she's upset with work and she doesn't want to be there. I mean, we don't know where the bruises came from, but to go back to what you were talking about with the bruises, they were not just from the night that she was either murdered or committed suicide. There's evidence that the bruises were there for weeks or days before, correct?
Correct. The medical examiner described it as multiple stages of resolution. So resolution meaning the healing process.
Right.
So
I guess people could say that could be self-inflicted as well, but that's a whole nother, I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. But, when Sam Goldberg was interviewed, he didn't say anything about it.
Right. So I want to get into his interview because I find this fascinating that so I read he was never a person of suspect. Is that true? I mean, first of all, we've all seen Dateline, and the ID network is the most popular network. I love the ID network. It's always the spouse. You know what I mean? Right. So why? And that's the first person that they have to clear. So we're going to get into the fact that we know now that people are saying there's rumors that his family is connected somehow with the police or with higher ups that maybe got him out of it. But just in the first night where you are like, wait a minute, what's happening here? We need to get his statement. Did they bring him down to the police station? Did they even question him as a suspect?
There are conflicting stories, and the city of Philadelphia has done a very good job over the course of 13 years of not releasing information. They just in the last couple of months, I think the Greenberg's lawyers have something like 5,000 pages of new police documents. So when I first started looking into this, I was told, he was led away in handcuffs and he was interviewed at the station. And that was by a very good source. But with the new docs that have been coming out, it doesn't appear that that was the case. It appeared that he was questioned. He was not technically in the presence of a lawyer when he was questioned, though two members of his family who are both powerful lawyers were there. But then a few days later, he was brought back to the station and he was represented by a man named Brian McMonigal. Brian McMonigal represented Bill Cosby. He represented Catholic cardinals, rappers, celebrities. He is one of the most well thought of defense attorneys in the nation, and certainly one of the most expensive. And in that interview, the police weren't allowed to ask Sam very much. Just tell us the story. And Sam repeated the story, and that was it.
Well, and what's interesting about that is if you are completely innocent, you want to find out who did this, or you think because of what you saw that it's a suicide. Why would you hire a very powerful criminal defense attorney? I mean, I think that's suspicious to me in general.
Yeah, I don't want to begrudge anybody exercising their constitutional rights, right? Like sure. if one of my children was being looked at by the police, you'd better believe that I would have a lawyer present for that. But I take your point. It's pretty suspicious. It wasn't a lawyer. It was Brian freaking McMonigal. It was the lawyer. Right. So exactly. Yeah, to me, Sam has always been the number one suspect, but police disagree with
with me. Happy.